We're in chapter 3, verse 4 or so. We're going to get to this magnificently depressing statement in 10 through 18 in a minute. So just to summarize, we'll do two summaries. The first one is we have the revelation of God's righteousness introduced in chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. And then you have, instead of that, you have the revelation that he doesn't use it. Yeah, he does. You have the revelation of the wrath of God in verse 18, which will begin a diatribe almost that will extend all the way to this sort of concluding statement right here in 19 and 20 of chapter 3. So 118, we're coming to the end of the first great manifesto of, we'll call it the manifesto of human depravity and condemnation or something that extends from 118 to 320. It's remarkable it's remarkable in many ways, but it's also remarkable in that he's writing it to a church he never met before. And it only takes him 17 verses to get there. And he goes on this diatribe concerning human wickedness, human unrighteousness. And I've thought about that, and I'm wondering, is it possible? Why is he unloading like this on a bunch of Gentile converts that he praised in his intro? What does he unload on this and on this issue? And we think we can fill in the blank successfully with a guy like Paul. Well, he did it because he was introducing himself, and he wanted like we would. We're anachronistic, right? Well, we're going to be a missionary on the field, and we want to be sponsored by this church, so we're going to introduce ourselves and give them our statement of faith or something like that. And a lot of people talk like that's what's going on here in Romans. So he's gonna go to Rome. This is 57. He's going to go to Rome, and he's going to expect that they're going to help him on his way to Spain. And so he's going to deliver, his statement of faith, introduce himself and deliver his statement of faith. Sure, all of that might be true. He doesn't say that. We just infer it because, frankly, that's what we would do if we were him. So that's good enough for us. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying it's not in there. It's not in the text that I know of. You disagree, you can say, but he certainly is giving them what he thinks of the gospel. There's no question about that. But I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that he's got a lot of Gentile converts who were probably also God-fearing. They were God-fearers attached to a synagogue, or they were raised in a synagogue environment or something like that. And so these issues are real for them too. There's going to be Jewish Christians at the church, but even the Gentile Christians are going to be disproportionately influenced by the Jewish Christians, especially if they came from a synagogue environment, which is extremely possible to likely, because when these Romans that were in Jerusalem, remember how we talked about this? I'm kind of getting ready for a sermon that I haven't even been asked to give anywhere. I do that. Where's that? There it is. So I was just working my way through some thoughts there, but this kind of outlines what happened in Acts, where the Roman church was given birth to practically as soon as the church in Jerusalem. There were Romans there. The implication is that they took the gospel back to Rome because there's no record. It's an argument from silence, but there's no record of any apostles going to Rome to found a church. It's just simply when Paul gets there at the end of the book, it's just there. And by all accounts, it's been there for 25 years. So not only is Rome not a new church, it's a founding church. So you've got Romans, you've got Gentiles in the church that have been there possibly for 25 years. You could potentially have 50, 60-year-old Christians in that church. So they're not newcomers. Some of them, this is all speculation, but pretty good speculation, can be inferred from the text. A well-developed, mature church. But at any rate, their scripture is the Old Testament, and it's likely that because Jews, these would have been God-fearing Gentiles who are attached to the synagogue, and Jews who are attached to the synagogue, go back to Rome, and the synagogue would have been the environment, you know, a likely environment where these people would have spent their formative time, you know, as believers. You can opine if you want over their pastor, but I'm just trying to make sense of the context of Romans and how he lays into this subject so quickly in a letter to a church that he's never been to. Go ahead.
Isn't the fact that we are sinners the biggest offense that people get when they hear the gospel?
Yeah, but he's writing to people who, like I said, when he got to Rome, remember that he didn't even get to Rome. He got off the ship and they're going to march forward. They're going to march northeast to Rome. They get met 30 miles out of Rome by the Christians in Rome. It's like a delegation welcoming him. I mean, these people, that's not the behavior of a church that doesn't know what it's doing or doesn't, you know, it just doesn't seem that way.
That's where the downfall comes,
Mhm.
when they try to make it socially acceptable.
Yeah.
So maybe that might be.
Yeah, and it's more than, it's the false dichotomy, right? It doesn't have to be either this or that. It can be a combination of all of these things. Yes, he does want to lay before them what he believes. Yes, he is looking to introduce himself and have them be sponsors of his mission to Spain. But also, yes, this, and this, and other things we don't know. 3 others that I haven't thought of. I'm just offering it out there. It's not as black and white. You know, the conventional wisdom is often, when you hear conventional wisdom, your ears should perk up. You know, analyze that a little bit, but anyway, that's what I think. And the other thing to just mention is, so, you know, been kind of obsessed with something I shouldn't be obsessed with. So I started here, right? And then I talked to, this is all messed up. It was even wronger. I put a less wronger version. This is a less wronger version of the one that I had on originally. But I called Greg, like I said last week, and I talked to him about it, and I'm probably going to get with him, the pastor here, about Romans 3 at some point, because it's complicated stuff. It's exactly the example if you think you know something because you've been reading it for 30 years, and now you have to teach it, and you go, wait a minute, well, what am I going to say about this? And black and white suddenly, what is black and white in your mind isn't quite so black and white as you thought it was. But anyway, so now it's this. It's evolved into this. This helps me process, this kind of thing helps me process what is going on, what has happened. You know, I like visual representations that encapsulate important things. They're not the final answer. They're not the only statement. They're a way of looking at something to help illuminate it. And this is where I'm at right now. I think it's more reflective of what's going on. Everything in here, except for the covenant of promise with Abraham, has already been articulated by Paul in Romans chapters 1 through 3. He doesn't use old covenant, new covenant language. But if you think of the law as the basis of the old covenant, or the foundation of the old covenant, well, the covenant is the foundation of the law. But well, however you want to think about it, this is all what he's articulated. So it's I don't know.
But what were they promised as a result of the works of the law?
The promises to Abraham in their minds.
That's not really salvation.
Right. So the question is, what has salvation to do with the old covenant works of the law written in stone, a law written in stone, or circumcision of the flesh? And they thought everything, and Paul is saying nothing. And it never did have anything to do with those things. He's going to get to that in chapter 4. The salvation, justification in Paul's language in the early chapters is a consequence of God's grace through faith. The appropriation of, which we'll get to hopefully in a bit, the appropriation of Christ's atoning work on the cross through faith, that now becomes, salvation becomes front and center. Of course, in the old covenant, salvation wasn't even an issue. You're not going to read salvation language in Exodus. That's not what it's about. It's about inheriting the promises that God made to Abraham, which was the land, and then the blessings of God on the land. But salvation is conspicuous by its absence. So the Jews were not framed to think that way. They were the people of God who by definition, by virtue of being the people of God as descendants of Abraham, were recipients of the covenant promise, which they still are, and which they were and then still are. And then the question becomes then, what are these promises? And we have to go back and we'll visit the covenant with Abraham because Paul's going ahead there in chapter 4. But it was more than the law. It was more than the land. The promises, the covenant was for land. Genesis chapter 15. It was a covenant of land, promise of land, but it was based on promise that vastly exceeded in scope land for a particular ethnic group. In you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And by virtue of that, God will be the father of many, Abraham will be the father of many nations. And in Paul's language, the father of us all through faith. That's chapter 4. So that's me ad-libbing again. If somebody wants to amend or, correct that or something, they can, but none of that was written down. At any rate, I don't know if that's valuable or not, but helps me think about it. Just talking to Greg about it, when he said that the problem with this one here was that there's no faith or Holy Spirit on the left side. So what has faith and the Holy Spirit to do with the old covenant? Those are really important questions. So you could have put in here, and I'm not even sure this is completely accurate, the indwelling of the Spirit on the right. Was there no indwelling of the Spirit on the left of the Holy Spirit in the whatever you want to, the era of the old covenant, the Mosaic covenant? So yeah, it just becomes just great issues to think about. The visual helps to bring that out a little bit, in my opinion. Okay, get rid of this thing. Chapter 3, verses 4 and following. Let's just start reading. What advantage has the Jew? What is the benefit of circumcision? Great in every respect. First of all, chiefly, and the only one he's going to mention, that they were entrusted with what he calls the oracles of God, which is very similar language to what Stephen used when he launched his assault on the Sanhedrin in Acts chapter 7. What then? If some did not believe, their unbelief will not nullify the faithfulness of God, will it? May it never be. It's a great Pauline statement there. May it never be. He uses it many times in this book. Rather, let God be found true, though every man be found a liar, as it is written, that you may be justified in your words and prevail when you are judged. So the point being, partly, he's the righteous judge. So let all the world know that when he judges and condemns, he does so justly and righteously. Part of his righteousness is a righteous judgment. And so when he judged the nation of Israel, on this timeline right here, when he judged the nation of Israel and earlier in 722 in the northern kingdom, he did so righteously. And he never repents of what he did, so to speak. He never says, what I did was wrong, so I'm going to make it up to you. He never has to redeem himself. He never has to make amends. He never has to atone for what he does. That's the human. That's the human side. And since we can't atone for what we've done, he does it for us. But he's not atoning for himself. He's atoning for us. That'll be Christ. We'll get there. But at any rate, the point being that when he judges at every moment on the timeline and into the future, including the great judgment that's coming, he does so righteously and justly, which means that humans have no response. They have no defense. What's the word for it? When you have an excuse, there's no extenuating circumstance. Mitigations or extenuating circumstances, none of that exists. He pronounces judgment, and that's it. He does so righteously and justly. I think something like that is what's going on here. What is this? Is this the Psalm? Is this Psalm 51? I forgot to open it. This Psalm 51? Whoops. Where am I?
It's right there, verse 4,
Got to stop talking to myself.
that you might be justified when you speak and be clear when you judge.
So this is David. You just got to go look at it. It's pretty transparent, but there it is right there. David, having been judged, acknowledges, and he did this in the narrative. Name the chapter, at least the book. But I remember the book. 2 Samuel. Yeah. Yeah. Chapter 10. Chapter 11, Nathan appears to him, gives him the thought experiment of the man that had the poor man that had one ewe lamb, and then, so the rich man takes it. And David says, I have sinned. Immediately, there's an immediate revelation to him. Nathan says, you are the man. And I have sinned. There's no words between the two statements. You are the man. I have sinned. Nathan, immediately, the Lord has forgiven you your sin. Nevertheless, this stuff ain't free. And this is going to be the consequence of it. And the consequence of it is everything that unfolds in 2 Samuel after that event, right through till about 21. But at any rate, that's a Davidic psalm that he's quoting from there. You don't have to know it. So he's talking to Romans. He's talking to a Gentile church that he expects to know this, as it is written, as it is written. And I expect you Romans to, I know that you Romans know when I write this, that you're going to know what I'm talking about. It's kind of humbling. And then he just quotes it. And the context also comes to light of a man saying this who has no excuse, offers none, offers no defense, offers no extenuating circumstances. Well, I was the king. I am the king. Doesn't that count for something? No. God says, I took you and I made you king. What do you have that you didn't get from me? It's this rapid fire, almost Job-like silencing that goes on with David. What a coincidence, Job and David. It's the same kind of lecture. Okay. So once again, it's important also to understand that he's talking here about Israel's unfaithfulness. He's not talking about, and he won't be talking about Gentile unfaithfulness. That's a redundancy. Gentile godlessness, Gentile unfaithfulness, that's a redundancy. The one comes with the other in the Jewish mind. Jewish guilt is a whole different story. Given their privilege, as he's opening up with here, part of the privilege was supposed to be in their minds. They're not judged like Gentiles are. Paul is saying, oh, you couldn't possibly be more wrong. And then that's what he's about to unload on them. But the point being that the context here is Jewish unfaithfulness. And if you look at the timeline again, think about what was going on in Israel about this part of the timeline. Context for Isaiah, whose ministry was in the 8th century, the 700s. The northern kingdom was destroyed by the Assyrians in 722. Isaiah preached judgment to them, and then also to the southern kingdom. And so that's the context of Isaiah, the coming judgment because of their unfaithfulness. Let's see. However, we will find out Israel's failure does not mean God's failure. He always wins. He always succeeds. He succeeds most strikingly in human failure, might be another way of saying that. It is in human failure that God does his best work. The work, of course, happened on the cross. So he's going to keep his covenant promises. We'll get to that. Did Israel's failure undo the covenant promises made to Abraham? No, on the contrary, it became the avenue of advance where the covenant promises would encompass the whole world through faith. Chapter 4. But God be found true, even though that's interesting. You know, they use a lot of neutral language. I wonder what the NIV does here. Mr. Neutral Language NIV. I'm kind of curious. A human being. Right there. But NASB did a lot of neutral language, as well, but they didn't choose to do it here. I don't know why. NIV? NIV is every human being. That's a New International Version? Interesting. I didn't know this is NASB. I didn't know they had different versions of the NIV. All right. Okay. I don't have a strong opinion about the neutral language thing. I think they get a little obsessed with it. Yeah, that's right.
Well, it depends on the Greek athlete wants a human being, right?
How do you speak human being about circumcision? They do. Yeah. Yeah. Meaning Moo's commentary does. When he does his own little translation, as I recall. I hope he never listens to this. Don't anybody send this to Doug Moo, please. Huh? Anthropos. Yeah. All right, that's enough. Doesn't matter. Okay, so in order to, let's read it some more. But if our unrighteousness, says Paul, what is the scope of our unrighteousness? Is it me and you, Gentile church in Rome? Is it me, the Jew, Paul the Jew, and my fellow Jews? Or is it our collective human race unrighteousness? And it's not at all obvious. What were you saying? Yeah. So they go back and forth here on this stuff because there's a lot of Jew Gentile stuff. You know, you just got to pay attention to it.
One observation that I'm not sure that was made is that the basic Bible of the New Testament, the people of the New Testament, very important books of the New Testament, was a Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament.
You're saying I don't make that point?
Well, I think when you think about him making.
I make that point. Yeah, I make that point, kind of. Yes. Yeah, I've actually referenced the Septuagint many times that was their Bible.
Was, and I think when you find, you're going to find them over and over again.
Verbatim from the Septuagint, yeah. In Paul. I'll go back and find some examples for that.
Well, I think that was the answer to your statement about he quoted in Psalm 51, you expected him to know it.
Yes.
Well, I think that's the point. They do. So they have been reading for a long time.
Yes.
Whether they understood it, I think that's not.
Yeah, my main point in that is they probably were introduced to it in a synagogue environment. That's what I would assume.
It could be. still, that's why the whole thinking of the Roman government was there was a Jewish sect because everything.
Yes.
was Bible.
Yes. Okay, if our unrighteousness demonstrates the righteousness of God, look, if by my sin, God is glorified, God is vindicated, the greatness of God is seen, however many different ways you want to think of that. How can I be judged if that's the case? Oh, and there's a even more stunning implication of it. Well, and if that is the case, then why don't we just sin more? Because it'll result in more glory for God. If our unrighteousness demonstrates the righteousness of God, what then? What shall we say? The God who inflicts wrath is not unrighteous, is he? For the point that I think I just made. I'm speaking in human terms. He's mitigating himself. He's making a point, a rhetorical point. That's how I read. I am speaking in human terms. May it never be, there it is again. Otherwise, how will God judge the world? But if through my lie, the truth of God abounded to his glory, like I just said, or something like it, why am I also still being judged as a sinner? And why not say, as we are slanderously reported and as some claim that we say, here we go, they've heard things. Let us do evil that good may come. He doesn't even bother responding to the charge. He just simply says their condemnation is just. It's so absurd for anyone to claim that I would say, let us do evil so that good may come, that I'm not even going to bother respond. May they just be condemned. They're condemned. Now is that word again, just. That God may be justified, prevail when he judges. This is when he is judged in his judging. When he is supposedly held to account for his judgment, their condemnation is just. He is vindicated. So probably Jews have put the word out that he's got a some kind of practice of license or something like that. Because remember, they did not have, it wasn't like there was a New Testament. It wasn't like his letters had been compiled and distributed across the empire and everybody knew what he thought. You just hear things. It just makes its way across the eastern provinces.
Is that let us do evil that good may come? Are they talking about the not holding all the extra rules in the law?
No, I think he's talking about, look, if through me sinning, God is glorified.
And wouldn't that be not being law?
They could be talking about law breaking. He could be thinking in terms of not so much a pagan style of sinning, with temple prostitutes and all this other stuff that he talked about in chapter 2, theft and so on, but simply breaking the law. If he was accused, which he was, of not only disregarding Moses, but advocating the overthrow of the law, then it's just the next step is very easy. He's advocating the breaking of the law, to which he might be summing up as he's been saying that let us do evil that good may come. Let us break the law, because in the breaking of the law, God's glory is magnified, and so that's a good thing. So let's just let us do more of it. But I don't know. He says do evil. He doesn't qualify what he means by evil there. But certainly to a Jew, do evil wouldn't mean worship pagan idols. It would be slander. It would be blasphemy against God, or the breaking of the Mosaic law, or something like that.
It was Jesus that when he healed on the Sabbath.
Yes. Yes. Their condemnation is just. God's character demands that he judge sin, the sin of his own people, as much as he does that of the world. What will he do with that conundrum? How can God judge sin? How can he square the circle? how can he both judge and forgive his own people? Well, first of all, if he's gonna judge the Gentiles, he's got to judge his own people. But if he's going to judge them, then his promises are going to fail. He's not going to fulfill his promise. Did he reject his own promises because his people failed? They acted unfaithfully, and so he had to judge them, and so it's all a failure? No. Welcome to the mystery of Christ. I'm using my own definition of mystery, not the one in Ephesians and Colossians, which we'll get back to. He's got to judge his own people. And the reason is coming up here in verse 9, they're just like everybody else. He's got to judge his own people. And the great miracle comes in the next few verses after that, 21 and following. So I do agree. I think he was, if you want to try to put different words to that, let us do evil that good may come. He was accused of advocating lawlessness. And he would have particularly been accused of that by Jews in the synagogue about his teaching, not only to Jews, but to Gentile God-fearers. See the slide on Matthew 7. I got a slide on Matthew 7 somewhere here. I wonder where that is. Matthew 7. Oh yeah, I already did this. It's a greats on God. Why did I put that here? What does that have to, oh, lawlessness, there it is. It is? Yeah, it is hard to see. Bad color. That's good to know. Lawlessness. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. There's no kingdom of heaven talk in Paul. But he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will come to me on that day saying, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, in your name perform many miracles? And I will say to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. So Paul is anything but lawless. He's not lawless. He's probably being accused of being lawless. And we are not lawless. Or we're not supposed to be. Not by God's will. All right. So lots of issues here. The justice of God. Yeah, this conundrum of how to judge his own people and also justify them and be just and faithful to himself and his promises when he does both things. It's the impossible task. And the only one who could do it is God himself, conceived in eternity past, played out on the human stage 2,000 years ago by the incarnate God himself. And an event that no one on the face of the planet could have ever anticipated, no matter how much they understood of the Old Testament. The closest that came was probably Simeon. But what exactly he understood beyond what he said to Mary is an open question. What did Mary understand? Hard to say. There's no real theology of atonement in the New Testament, not New Testament, in the Gospels. There's a couple of enticing, tantalizing statements. The Son of Man came to seek and save that which was lost, give his life as a ransom for many. But that's as far as it goes. He just is simply the suffering Messiah who died on the cross for the most part. And so the full bloom of revelation on that came after the fact, after the advent of the Spirit, in the minds of these inspired writers, where they unpacked these great mysteries, these insights into the history of redemption that sit behind the events themselves. And that's what we're reading right here. All right. Their condemnation is just, these accusers up here. What then? A lot of these questions he asks, and then answers. Some of them he doesn't even answer. What advantage has the Jew? What is the benefit of circumcision? If our unrighteousness demonstrates the righteousness of God, what shall we say? Is the God who inflicts wrath unrighteous? Why am I still being judged as a sinner? Why don't we say, let us do evil that good may come? All these questions that he asks. Throws them all up. He throws them all out there and he demolishes them in this next definitive statement about who is just and who is not, who is righteous and who is not. What then? Are we better than they? We Jews, are we better than they? No, not at all. For we have already asserted that both Greeks and Jews, so to speak, are all under sin. What does that mean? We'll get to it. As it is written. So there's your perfect tense. Great biblical, a Greek rhetorical technique, a rhetorical technique in Greek using the perfect tense, implying a state of being. It was written, as it was written, or has been written, but the point of it, the magnitude, the nature of the thing comes out in the present tense. It was written, and it results in a new state of being that exists today. It is written, as it is written today, and then he launches into it. There is none righteous, not even one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become useless. There is none who does good. There is not even one. So the point being made by repetition. When these writers want to make a point, they get really repetitive. But let's just stop there for a second. I pulled this out and put it in a slide so you can see it a little different. There is none righteous, not even one. None, all together. And then he brackets it with a very similar sounding statement. There is none who does good, not even one. The definitive statement of human, not just human sin, wickedness, but human inability. It transcends something like lack of perfection. He's not getting at that. You can see that in the next little piece of it. Look at the what's the word? This style is not right. Just read it. He changes his tone a little bit here, and it gets much more sinister and treacherous. Their throat is an open grave, with their tongues they keep deceiving. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their paths, and the path of peace they have not known. And then the great summary statement of the foundational statement of it, there is no fear of God before their eyes. So he moves from I don't know, not trying hard enough. I'll just go on with the unable in the first part to unwilling. These people, it's categorically different. This is a statement on intent. The intent is evil. Why don't they do good? Why is there not even one? Because their intent is evil. From their youth. We'll get back to that in a second. That's a quote from Genesis after the flood. So here's the statement of the human condition that underlies all of the allegations and all of the statements before it. He just gets right down to the bottom. It's not that you don't try hard enough. It's not that if you tried harder, you could. That's not the issue. The issue is, look at the nature of the person that he's talking about, or people that he's talking about in 13 through 18. These are not the sorts of people that want to do law keeping. Law is not a factor in their brains whatsoever. This is a composition of 6 different Old Testament. He doesn't rely on one text for this. This is 6 different texts fused together. So let's just what's Deuteronomy 4? Yeah, we already did that. Let's just go ahead and get rid of that. Take a look at these. Starting back at the first one. This is a basic one. Fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have committed abominable deeds. There is no one who does good. The Lord has looked down from heaven upon the sons of men to see if there are any who understand. It did not go well. Any who seek after God. Response, they all have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. Absolute, universal depravity and condemnation. You get this sense of a God looking down upon the sons of men, scouring the earth for even one. That's the point, right? Looked in every little corner of the world for anyone at all who does good. And his conclusion is there's not even one. The harsh condemnation. It's offensive in every way to our sensibilities about ourselves, particularly as civilized people. We take so much credit for being civilized. Right? We're civilized. We think we're good people when in fact we're just civilized. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to get stopped by that cop and have it ruin my day. I don't want this guy to beat me over the head and shoulders for saying something to him. So I'm going to be civilized. And then I'm going to take credit for being good. But I'm telling you right now, being civilized is not being good. You take away that little veneer of civilization, what kind of world do we live in? Take away law enforcement, take away consequences. What kind of world do we live in? Huh? You got Chicago, you got Portland. That's right. You got those cities. That's exactly right. The Lord of the Flies. That's what the story is about, essentially. The thin veneer of civilization. Well, what do they call the police force? The thin blue line? Is that the line separating anarchy from civilization? Thin blue line. I don't really know that that's what that means, but that's how I take it.
This reminds me of when atheists were trying to tell me that I was good.
Yeah. You don't get any credit for finding. It doesn't, just because you don't find goodness in yourself does not mean that you don't have value. They don't equal each other. You still have value. I mean, God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. In the midst of our depravity. That's exactly when. Remember, he was crucified by those he died for. He died on behalf of. It's an amazing thing. The contradiction of the cross.
Pride keeps us from seeing our need for salvation because of that. Trying to think of us.
Yeah, so I'll close with this. So when I was on staff at the Crusade, I had one of the students I was working with, good guy, his name was Mick. Not that you care. But he had a friend that would show up with Crusade every once in a while. And I was talking to him at a coffee shop after one of the meetings, and I still think Romans 10:4 is one of the great statements of the gospel in Romans or anywhere. Not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. Subject. It's speaking of pride. There's a humility involved in that, right? Because you bring no merit. If you subject yourself to the righteousness of God, you do so without merit. Humbling. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. And I think I read this to him at the coffee shop. And I said, the problem that you have is not that you're not a good person. It's that you have no righteousness. So where are you going to get it from? And it just ended. But like 3 weeks later, he showed up. He came, we went there every Thursday night after the meeting. He showed up. He just marched through the front door. And I remember thinking, is he going to hit me? I mean, he came walking, and he sat down. I'm not even sure he said hi, but he said, I just don't see why I need righteousness. So apparently this statement had bothered him for 3 weeks or however long, 2 weeks, however long it was. What's the obsession with righteousness? Because righteousness is binary. You either have it or you don't. Goodness, you can be good on one day and bad on the next. You can do a good thing and then not do a good, and then don't do good things for 8 hours. But righteous is an abiding state of affairs, right? It's not something that can come and go. God's righteousness is constant. His goodness is demonstrated in what he does. His righteousness is a constant. It's a part of who he is, like his holiness. I'm thinking out loud here, so systematic theology is not my thing. If you disagree with that, let me know. But that's the deal. And it's just stuck in his craw. Because, you know, when you can count on goodness, well, just do some good things. And, you know, like, you know, we get a big enough pile of good things for God to look at. He'll be impressed with a big pile of goodness that you did. Righteousness is a different thing, and it bothered him. And it was Romans chapter 10, verses 3 and 4. Okay, let's stop right there, since I'm 2 minutes over. I didn't get very far again, but nobody's surprised at that. Okay, I'll see you.